if you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
Nobody even knew that he still had it, which means there was a hole in the process. But that software alerted us to where that laptop was, and they were able to get him to bring it back.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery. Hey everyone, welcome into our Cybersecurity Mission podcast. My name is Allie Krings. Today we are sitting down with Cherry Kent. Cherry, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm lovely. It's great to sit down with you.
Glad to be here with you too.
Well, I've heard so many fabulous things about you, and we are going to be talking about incident response in this podcast, but before we get there, I heard a rumor that you are a marathon runner.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's not just been a marathon or two marathons. How many have you run?
I've done 50 now.
50. And the most recent was Boston Marathon, is that right?
Yes, Boston, that was my 17th Boston.
Oh my gosh. So tell us about why you're running so many marathons. That's incredible.
It's a sickness, I guess. I don't really know, I don't know how to explain it. The first time I tried running, I liked it.
Okay.
And so I did all the distances up to about 15 miles, and I said, okay, it's time to do a marathon. So I was in my late 30s at the time, and I did a marathon. I qualified to go to Boston, so I started going to Boston then. And then we went other places, and just beautiful places to run, like out in California, Big Sur, and Maine, and South Africa. I did a 56K in Cape Town, South Africa, and that's the longest distance I've ever done. It's a little bit past 8 miles past a marathon.
Wow.
That was one and done for those, but
amazing. So you've done it all. Okay, so we'll jump into a little bit more about your experience. And how long have you been with Kirkpatrick Price?
Almost 3 years.
Okay, but before this, you were a security officer at a hospital for how long?
I was there for 32 years, but I was in the security officer position for about 10.
Wow.
The last 10 years.
So how did you find yourself in that role?
Well, I had started out as a programmer.
Okay.
And back in the days when we had things like COBOL and RPG-3, I say COBOL because most people don't even know about RPG-3. So I started out doing that, and then we didn't even have a network at that time.
Wow.
So in 1995, our hospital installed a network, and my boss said, who wants to be involved in the network?
You're like, pick me.
And he did. So I was the network manager for a good number of years, and then I switched to being the disaster recovery manager.
Wow.
And then my boss said one day, we need to have an IT security officer, and guess what? You're it. So it was a title change. It wasn't really anything else, and we had a lot of things that we needed to do, so we kind of started building our security program at that time, and I found that I really was fascinated with cybersecurity and started getting my certifications, and then took early retirement in 2020 and put my shingle out on LinkedIn, and the next thing I know, some guy named Joseph Kirkpatrick is sending me messages on LinkedIn. Do you want to go back to work?
And you're like, hey, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Another marathon, why not? I actually want to ask as well because, we see this all over the industry. It's mostly a male-dominated industry. What's it like, being able to have such an experience and be one of the fewer women in this area?
And it's really changed. At first, I would go to this conference out in California called RSA, and it was just really strange because the men would be in line for the bathroom, and the women could just go straight in. So that part was nice, but there's some struggles there, getting people to take you seriously and that type of thing. And so, yeah, it's been a journey, and one thing I really liked about Kirkpatrick Price and Joseph is that he hires not just women, but old people. I'm no spring chicken.
I think one of the best things about Joseph as well is he hires the best people for these roles, you know, and that is just the truth through and through. So that's why whenever I get to sit down for one of these podcasts, I am like so giddy because I know I really am sitting down with somebody that's renowned in the industry. So I want to dive into incident response. And for somebody who is just joining us today, I always like to start with the very basic. What is incident response?
Every company is going to have some sort of incident at some time that's going to impact their IT system. It's going to cause it to go down. They could have a data breach. They could have a theft. An incident can be all kind of things. So they need to prepare. They need to have an incident response plan. And start with defining what an incident might be, and then work on how they're going to take care of the incident when it hits.
So unlike a business continuity plan, this is like more like a one-off.
Yeah, they can get closely related. They can actually end up being the same thing. You can end up having a disaster at the same time you're having an incident, but it is kind of a one-off, in that a lot of things will start as what you think might be an incident, but it doesn't really turn out to be, and then you might have the opposite thing happen where you've got something very small and everybody's kind of, well, we'll just go home, and the next thing you know, they're calling everybody back in because things are crashing.
So let's just talk about maybe a few examples in here, and we'll do like a little bit of a story time.
Okay.
So will you just share with us, maybe we'll start with one example of an incident and just what happened.
This is probably the worst one that I ever went through. 2009. I will never forget it. We were all in a meeting. It was actually a disaster recovery meeting, which is kind of ironic because I was a disaster recovery manager at that time. And the help desk started getting all these calls that things were going down. So we actually had to disband the disaster recovery meeting to try to figure out what was going on. So everybody was kind of getting in their little silos and trying to figure it out. And what it turned out to be was a virus that had attacked our IT system. It had come in we finally figured out that it came in on a laptop.
Wow.
And it just went through all the servers and all the PCs that it could find to.
Was it an employee's laptop?
It was an employee's laptop. It was such a horrible thing because we did everything wrong. There was a guy who was in charge of the antivirus software, and he had decided that he was going to update all the software, and he didn't tell anybody. So he had everything in a state where some machines had antivirus and some had no antivirus.
Oh my goodness.
And then we also had systems that weren't patched.
Yeah.
So it was like a double storm of those two things together, causing total havoc for almost a year. Wow. Now, we weren't down a whole year, but we would get something cleaned up, a server, we would work on it, have to rebuild it, and it would have a problem again when it came back up. Because what happened too was that another virus hit right after that. So we ended up having to get help from an outside company to help us get everything straightened out.
So I think it's really important actually that you've been in the shoes, I mean, unfortunately, right, been in the shoes of a company who's had these incidents occur. And at the time, of course, we always wish we would have done the right thing, but you've also had, you know, that next domino that falls, right? So, you know, if you could go back in time, what would be one area that you would have maybe changed in this scenario?
Ooh, it's hard to just list one, but one would definitely be change management, where if you're going to install some new software or you're going to update software, you need to put it in the change management system and have that approved and have a plan going forward, and not just be doing things that nobody knows about. And then the other is having an incident commander in charge instead of everybody going off into their silos to do things. And then of course the other thing is having the tools. If you don't have antivirus software and patching done, you're gonna have more incidents than you want ever.
So that was maybe the worst of the worst, right? Can you tell us about maybe when you've worked with other clients or other companies and they've come to you with incidents, what incidents do you see as almost recurring or commonplace that might be easier to mitigate?
A lot of clients don't have a plan for theft. So if you got laptops and they're not encrypted,
Yeah.
then you could have a problem if there's data on there. And there are rules when we talk about policies. You want to have policies where people aren't storing critical data on their laptops, but does that always happen? It's better to have that secondary control of having some encryption on those laptops so that nobody can, if they do steal the laptop, then they're not able to get into it
Yeah.
and get the data off of it. So that's an easy one, and people don't always understand that that could be an issue, that theft could be a problematic thing for them, especially in healthcare, because if you have something stolen, actually, because of HIPAA, you need to prove that nobody got any data. So if you can say it was encrypted,
Wow.
then usually that's considered a safe harbor. So, but you got to be able to prove it.
Wow. I mean, incredibly challenging, I think, to be able to be in those situations, right? But then to be able to come out a little bit stronger. Can you, maybe for a company who's joining us, listening today saying, we want to start building up an incident response team or, have some plans in place, but how can we start to identify what an incident might even be?
For us, one of the things that happened was when ransomware started hitting the news, our board was very concerned about that.
Yeah.
So that's where we started. We decided that we would create a playbook just for ransomware. And of course, we already had an incident response plan, and the incident response plan defines who the team is going to be, the incident commander, where you're going to meet, and your contact list, because you need to be able to know everybody that needs to be contacted.
Okay.
So we actually had a ransomware attack as well.
Yeah.
So we started there, and one of the things that we wanted to do was to empower people to do something about it.
Okay.
So in healthcare, the patient is number one, and nobody ever wants to take anything down.
Of course.
So we empowered our people to take a machine off the network if there was a problem, if there was the least possibility that something could be infected, so it couldn't spread to everything else.
Okay.
So that was part of the playbook. And there were numerous other things as well, knowing to call the FBI.
Yeah.
Because they want to know about these type of things, so they can try to find the people who are doing it.
Yeah. Is there any way that, I mean, you think about the viruses that can occur and stuff. Is there any way to first identify, but then just prevent before you get to that
Yes,
incident?
that's actually the first step, is to identify everything you have. You can't protect what you don't know that you have. So you need a good inventory, and then you need to have that tool, and you start using that tool, the antivirus software, and the patching on every device in your system.
I think for a lot of companies too, nobody wants an incident to occur, right? And the worst thing that can happen is that you're not prepared for it. So once that incident occurs, what should be the first step?
Having that person, the incident commander, take charge and getting everybody together to talk, but also freeing up those people that are the first line of defense who can actually be looking at those logs and trying to figure out what's going on. You don't want to have a million people asking them questions. So, the incident response commander is keeping everybody away from them and letting them work the incident and figure out what's going on. But that's the first thing, is to start, and you want to try to identify what it is that you're dealing with, and also thinking about how you want to save things so that maybe you can find out the root cause of what happened. And that's one reason why you would remove a machine from the network rather than power it down. You want to keep that audit trail so you can try to figure out what's going on.
What are the most common questions you get from other companies or clients wanting to create a more robust incident response program?
And most of them are just really worried about having it at all, and they may even have a plan, but they're not sure what to do next. So I always do advise to start with the playbooks, and have a meeting every quarter at least, or maybe even every month, until you have some playbooks and you're talking about it constantly and training people so that they know what to do if something happens, and who to call and that type of thing.
And who should be included in those conversations? Is it just upper management, or is this like a luncheon program that the entire company should be part of?
We tried to make sure that all the IT staff was involved, not just the people who were taking care of those tools, but the programmers and all the managers in the IT department. And then we had people who were in charge of systems in other departments, so those people also needed to know what to do if there was an incident and who to call and that type of thing.
So in an incident of theft, I think obviously nobody wants that to happen to them, right? Let alone a company have that happen to an employee. What should that employee's first response be? Is it, going to security? Is it going to IT? And how quickly should they reach out as opposed to trying to track it down in other ways?
Yeah, they need to do something immediately. They need to call their supervisor, and that if they don't call the police, somebody needs to call the police, and you would work through the security at the company. But we had one tool that would allow us to track a machine and do a data delete on the machine if somebody plugged it into the network. But that company required a police report before they would do that for obvious reasons, because you don't know for sure that you're deleting data off of a machine that was stolen. So they required that we have a police report. So you need to make sure that people know those steps and who to report to, and that there's actual police report if you've got that kind of software that's doing that type of thing.
Well, what about on the flip side? What if there's like an employee whose role had been terminated and they've kept that device?
We actually had that happen too, and that same software, it popped up, that laptop. Nobody even knew that he still had it, which means there was a hole in the process. But that software alerted us to where that laptop was, and they were able to get him to bring it back.
Wow. So, I mean, incidents really do, I think, run the gamut, because most people aren't thinking about a terminated employee, causing one of those problems either.
Terminated employees can cause a lot of problems. I was talking about that earlier. I had another incident that happened. Like I said, I have lots of incidents where we had terminated an employee, and the IT department worked behind locked doors. And one day I walked in, and the terminated employee was sitting at a desk working on a computer, which means that IT employees let him in, and they also had to probably log him into a computer. So, I mean, that was an incident, a social engineering thing, where he was telling them that he needed to have some tools that he had on the computer, and they just let him do it. They didn't question him at all. They just let him do it.
So, I mean, this feels almost like a question I should be asking HR, but I'm going to be asking you, Cherry, as incident response. Let's just say that, our company has an employee that's no longer a good fit. What should actually happen then? Because obviously letting this person back into the building and going on a laptop or taking their laptop home, those aren't the right options. So what is the right thing to do after an employee's been terminated?
Well, you want to immediately remove all access to all systems, and you want to make sure that they give their equipment back. So those two things. And then you want to tell everybody that this has occurred, so they know in case that person calls them and tries to figure out some way to get some access. Let's say if you're an IT administrator and you don't know that this guy was terminated, and he calls and tells you, well, my account's not working, then he could possibly talk you into giving him his credentials back. So you want to make sure that people know about that, and you want to make sure that people are educated about not letting people in the building who are terminated.
I mean, it really just goes on and on about different things that can occur. What are just some really simple tips that you might give a company who's listening to us today, and you can just help recommend their strategy when they are building an incident response program?
Don't put it off. Get going, because that's the biggest thing I hear, is that we just can't get, we have too much to do and we can't do this. Find time to do it. Start Start small. It can seem overwhelming when you got a blank sheet of paper in front of you to write this plan. Find one on the internet, adapt it to your needs, then start working those playbooks. And I think that once you start having those meetings and you get people in the room and they start brainstorming about these things, then you'll actually have some concrete ways that you can try to take care of it.
Awesome. And Cherry, before I wrap up, I want to ask you, is there anything else that you want to add on or share with our listeners today?
Go write your incident response plan.
Awesome. Well, Cherry, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Thank you, Allie.
All right, and stay tuned. We'll have more of our cybersecurity mission coming up again soon. When you work with a Kirkpatrick Price cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Hi, I'm Nathan, and I'm here to talk about risk assessment. I enjoy talking to clients about risk assessments because having a good understanding about what your assets are and what are the risks that are pointed at those assets is kind of the foundation of having a strong information security program. So when I talk to clients about the kind of asset groups, people, technology, facilities, supply chain, and intellectual property, I try to encourage them to think outside the box about how each of those groups could apply to their business. So traditionally, something like supply chain, maybe you think about trains and shipping and semi-trucks and other more kind of physical logistical activities. But for a modern, SaaS organization, that could really look more like a cloud provider that you use or something like a data clearinghouse that gives you access to critical information for your daily operations.
If you want to prepare for success with information security policies, visit kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or the show notes to download today's episode resources. We're here to empower you to face your cybersecurity and compliance challenges. Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.